welcome to the City Club of Portland's Friday Forum. Today is Friday, July 15th. I'm Melody Rose, the president of City Club, and I'm very pleased to have you all with us today. Both the members and guests who join us here at the Governor Hotel, and those of you listening on OPB or KBPS radio, or watching on Portland Community Media's CityNet 30. Today we're delighted to welcome House co-speakers Bruce Hanna and Arnie and Roblan, who will discuss the challenges and successes of the past legislative year. But before our program begins, we have a few announcements. To begin with, out of respect to our guests and our speakers, if I could ask you to please all silence your cell phones. Next, I'd like to give a warm City Club welcome to any new City Club members who may be present with us today. If anyone here is new or here for the first time, would you please stand and allow us to welcome you? Nope. City Club's corporate and media partners are essential to the vitality and sustainability of all of our City Club activities. I'd like to thank our very generous media partners, including Oregon Business Magazine, and to offer our deep appreciation to the Friday Forum corporate sponsors. Please join me in thanking communications firm Morel Inc., utility company Northwest Natural, and the law firms of Perkins Coie and Schwabe Williamson and Wyatt. We are very grateful for your support and your commitment to the City Club mission. And of course, if your company or firm would like to support the club's mission through sponsorship, please contact our friendly City Club staff at the back of the room for more information, or feel free to call the City Club offices. I also wish to share with you that in addition to our usual member questions, which come from the microphone, we'll be taking index card questions during today's question and answer period. During the forum, we invite you to write any questions that you have for the speakers on the index cards that are located on every table in the room. You do not need to be a City Club member to submit such a question. During the board host question, the City Club staff will collect these index cards and pick the best question, which I will read from the microphone. City Club members are still welcome to come to the microphone to ask their questions during the typical question and answer period. We are sure that you will come up with some great questions for these speakers. And now to our program. With the Oregon legislature divided nearly equally between Democrats and Republicans, many predicted political meltdown. Instead, House co-speakers Democrat Arnie Roblan and Republican Bruce Hanna found opportunities for bipartisan action on very tough issues facing our state. Today, the co-speakers will analyze legislative achievements from the past year and will also address topics that the legislature failed to tackle. Our first speaker today is Bruce Hanna. Representative Hanna is currently serving in his fourth term as the state representative for House District 7, which includes parts of Lane and Douglas counties. An active and successful businessman since a young age, he currently owns and operates the Douglas County Bottling Company of Roseburg, a Coca-Cola distribution company, and its sister company, Automatic Vending Services. His civic activities include serving on the board of directors for Roseburg's Community Cancer Center and as a member of the Roseburg Executive Association. Our second speaker with us today is Arnie Roblan. After many years as a high school teacher and principal, Representative Roblan retired in 2004 and was elected to the legislature that same year. Now in his fourth term in the Oregon legislature, Representative Roblan represents House District 9, which extends from Coos Bay north to Florence. He serves on the boards of numerous organizations, including the Southwestern Oregon Transportation and Economic Development Work Group. He received the Milk and Education Award in 1997, and in 2002 was recognized by his alma mater as a University of Oregon Distinguished Alumnus. Today's guests hold a unique position. Following the 2010 election, with the House facing a historic 30-30 tie, Republican and Democratic legislators unanimously elected Representatives Hanna and Roblan to share, for the first time in Oregon history, the role of Speaker of the House. We are very pleased to have Oregon's first co-speakers here today with us. So without further ado, please help me welcome to the podium Representative Hanna.
Thank you, Melody. Very nice to be with you in the Portland City Club this afternoon. We've been here, I think, just once before, and it's always a pleasure to come back. We were earlier this morning out at Willamette View on the other side of the river in Portland, meeting with and enjoying our very first event post-session with a group of seniors out there. So we're spending part of the day with you in Portland, and for a couple of Southern Oregon guys, that's a lot of fun, trying to just find our way across the closed bridge. We do appreciate the opportunity to be here, and thank you. It has now just been over 2 weeks since sine die of the legislature. That has been a good time, a great time, if you might, to reflect on the process, the accomplishments, some of the disappointments, and probing to be what would be the next steps for us. I want to tell you that since coming into the legislature, I've said it's always been a humbling and rewarding experience to serve in the legislature for my own House district, District 7, and for all Oregonians. I've felt that way since being first appointed in 2004, but especially in the position of gaining the respect of my colleagues and being elected as one of 2 co-speakers was extraordinarily humbling. And sharing the job with my friend and colleague, Arnie Roblan, is and will continue to be a true honor. Arnie and I came to Salem at the same time, but I think it's safe to say we've spent more time together in the last 8 months than our own wives or any other time in our previous service. We have had the opportunity to work through challenges. We've seen each other at the highest points in accomplishment, and at the low points, we've debated process, policy, and budget. But whatever the issue of the hour might have been, we have approached it with a pledge to one another that would be to listen, to be honest, to respect one another. And we made that commitment to one another and to the entire legislature in January. And our further commitment was that the session would be one of cooperation and collaboration. And we knew that our leadership at the top would simply set the tone for the rest of our members. Now, as I mentioned, Arnie and I spend a lot of time together, so you may hear some overlap in what we say. We discussed it momentarily here. We've discussed it at other events. But you will also hear distinct differences in the things we say, and for that, we're grateful to have the opportunity to share with you. When the dust settled after last November's election, I'll be the first one to admit that the question kept crossing my mind, now what? We knew a 30-30 split was possible, but we did not consider it highly probable. We had a plan for 29, we had a plan for 31, but clearly no one caucus can have a plan for 30. Because it simply takes both sides. From the get-go, I sensed that the best course of action, as did others, was not some type of coup that further fractured the legislative body. Rather, the better option would be a model of shared power, truly representing Oregon voters who put us in this very position. We ended up with a plan that most observers raised their eyebrows and sort of shook their heads with an expression that said, "What in the world are you doing? This will never work." One of my favorite quotes came from an OSU political science professor and a go-to guy for the media. And what he said is, "The Roman emperors could not have dreamed up a more delicious torture for their gladiators than this." Well, as it turns out for him, it would have been a fairly boring day at the Colosseum. Naysayers predicted we couldn't elect speakers, couldn't pass rules, couldn't agree by party on much. However, on opening day in January, we passed our rules overwhelmingly. Only 3 no votes, bipartisan in nature, 2 from one party and 1 from the other. And then Speaker Roblan and I were unanimously elected. The naysayers went on to say we wouldn't agree on where to refer bills or who should be on which committee. We rarely disagreed on bill referrals, and we had a default mechanism in place for when that happened. We didn't make a single adjustment to committee chairs or membership of our committees throughout the entire session. They predicted we couldn't get out on time. We finished early, and it was the shortest session in decades. And they predicted that even if all the organizational stuff worked out, we simply would not accomplish anything. Gridlock might ensue. It was proving this point wrong, of which I am most proud, and I want to take a few minutes to highlight some of the accomplishments from my perspective. First, the 2011 legislature balanced the budget despite continually declining revenue forecasts. In fact, that balancing started literally days after we convened, when we rebalanced the 09-11 budget. Not only did we balance the budget, we did it in a responsible and, in my opinion, much more sustainable method and approach. The legislature opted to set aside $460 million in ending fund balance to help alleviate pressure from even further declining revenues that could happen later in the biennium. This is an unprecedented ending balance, but now that we have annual sessions, which were largely pitched to voters as necessary to better fiscally manage the state, we have an opportunity to come back in February and make strategic fiscal decisions based on that reserve and other available resources and the needs available at that time. We still crafted a 2-year budget, but we left flexibility for the year to come. Further, we did not simply rubber stamp capital improvement projects around the state for bonding. Borrowing money can be easy, but it is expensive. Instead, we took a rigorous approach to analyzing current status and viability of projects. We funded many projects with cash rather than debt, and we pledged to revisit in February those projects that were not ready for prime time. And we came to an agreement on which projects to fund immediately. And in my mind, most importantly, we balanced this budget without raising taxes. Secondly, we passed a couple of redistricting plans. And not only did the committee come to an arrangement on a legislative plan, House and Senate, they also eked out at the last minute a congressional plan. Representatives Sean Lindsay and Chris Garrett, and I know Chris is here today somewhere and I can't see because of the lights, he's over here. The House co-chairs and Senators Suzanne Bonamici and Chris Telfer, the Senate chair and vice chair, deserve tremendous kudos for their work. There are few issues as difficult to tackle in the building, and they did it with diplomacy and conviction. As proud as I am of their accomplishment, I believe more strongly today than I did a year ago that an independent commission is the way to handle this process. It's politically charged, and the effort takes tremendous time, money, and attention away from other legislative matters. Furthermore, with this process, you have the fox guarding the henhouse, those who will run and run in campaigns drawing district boundaries. And in my mind, despite the accomplishment, one round of completed plans does not equate to a great track record of the legislature. I believe Oregon could get a better result in a long-term success in the redistricting process through a different process. Third, we passed some of the most substantive education reform in decades. With the help of the governor and strong coordination between both chambers and both parties, Oregon students will reap the benefits of a variety of policies passed. Some bills give parents expanded opportunities to choose the best education option for their child. Others provided enhanced funding for innovative and proven educational programs. Others will help increase accountability in schools, providing parents with greater information about the performance of schools and offerings students other options. And others focus on teacher preparation and development. From optional all-day kindergarten to a state-appointed superintendent, education reforms passed during the 2011 session sent a very clear message. The status quo is not acceptable. The legislature simply said to the Department of Education, to school districts, and to parents, we will no longer do the same old thing year after year and expect different results. Here are some new ideas for kids of all ages. Let's move education forward in Oregon. We also made positive steps in the area of health care. So long as the federal government is going to mandate the states that states have health care exchanges, it is important that we take our state to an active role in designing and managing the exchanges rather than the federal government. I think we took the first step during the session in establishing the exchange program, the exchange corporation that will design the overall exchange for approval by the 2012 legislative body. Importantly, the current outline considers private sector, public sector interests, and maintains an objective that works for citizens and employers, not just the government. As an employer myself, I know firsthand how expensive it is to provide health insurance, but I also know the benefit provided to my employees. My professional association has decided to take on this project nationwide and is helping small businesses, small bottlers like me afford that benefit. I didn't and do not support continued government encroachment into managing or mandating health insurance. But the reality of the current federal law requires us to engage in the process, and I want to make sure we do it as efficiently and effectively as possible. A diverse team, complete with insurers, business owners, was an important part of this. And with the education efforts, I look forward to seeing who the governor selects and seeing their work product in February. We also formed a joint healthcare transformation committee, which put the framework together for the governor's work on restructuring the delivery of health-related services. The goal, and a very lofty one at that, is to realize nearly $240 million in savings. I remain hopeful we can realize those savings, and there is much work to be done between now and February to actually implement that type of change. Amid all these accomplishments, there are a few disappointments. These are things I remain committed to and items I will continue to work on throughout my time as co-speaker. I think the legislature could have done more to create jobs, something Oregon desperately needs. With lingering near double-digit unemployment and rates pushing 20% in rural communities, I can't emphasize enough the need to expand job creation opportunities. We did pass a linear projects bill and ensure the state was reconnected to the federal tax code. We did establish new community development incentive program and approved some strategic capital improvement projects. However, more can and should be done. I hope we continue to advance efforts like what was described as the Main Street Investment Plan, which would help shake loose available capital for shovel-ready projects at both your home and business, and that is throughout the state. Or House Bill 2001, which would have improved forest management and restored economic activity to many rural counties. Or a regionalized land use project, which would allow local governments to engage in land use planning that makes sense for regions. Because simply said, what works in Portland may not exactly work in LeGrand, Bend, Coos Bay, or Roseburg. I also wish we could have made progress on PERS reform. Current Oregon law requires a public employer contribute all or nothing toward a 6% employee PERS contribution. Most public employers, including the state, contribute all of that 6%, which is described simply as the pickup. In this biennium, the pickup will cost the state of Oregon $334 million. I had language drafted that would have given the governor and other public employees the ability to negotiate the amount of the pickup. Rather than an all or nothing proposal, the governor could have, for example, agreed to pick up even just half of the 6%. Unfortunately, that language or bill didn't have the traction in this legislative body and this legislative session, but that doesn't change both the immediate and long-term impacts of escalating PERS costs, and I hope we can make more progress on this in the future. Along those lines, I hope we can take a look at overall compensation packages, including health benefits for state employees. Nearly every other state, and certainly most private sector organizations, requires an employee contribution for health care. Most school districts in Oregon also require some sort of contribution for health care, the average being around 9%. However, in Oregon, state employees are not required to contribute anything. That, coupled with the fact that we have a premium plan, not my description, theirs, leads to high utilization rates and an extraordinary burden on tax resources. We'd like to see permanent steps taken to require a contribution toward health care. Even something as low as 5% could save $92 million in general fund dollars. Finally, I'd like to make sure the legislature is focused on two long-term problems to Oregon. First is the issue of federal county payments program, which was established by the federal government as a way to aid counties with vast tracts of public land. Unfortunately, that program may go away, but counties still don't have a way to utilize this land. As a result, there are counties literally on the verge of bankruptcy, and we have to figure out how to manage that issue, which is in fact a statewide issue, not just a rural thing. Second is the issue of long-term fiscal stability. For years, we have proposed ideas to help boost our savings plan in Oregon, taking tax revenue off the top and putting it into the rainy day fund so that we'll have it when necessary. Saving at the state level, especially when we are so impacted by economic volatility, cannot be an afterthought. I am hopeful we can put our heads together and agree on a responsible savings and stability plan. As I said to my colleagues just before sine die, we have completed a successful, a historic legislative session, but as all of you know, our work did not end June 30th. Only 1/4 of our legislative term has passed. Interim committees have much heavy lifting to do. Work groups are beginning to meet to develop ideas for 2012 and beyond, and major initiatives like the Healthcare Insurance Exchange, Healthcare Transformation, and the Governor's Education Investment Board are all due back in February for approval on next steps and actual implementation. Further, we have an obligation to provide oversight on major projects such as the Columbia River crossing. Despite the heavy lifting before us, I anticipate the next year and a half will be filled with more of the same spirit of collaboration, cooperation, and dedication demonstrated throughout this session. That's what it will take to continue moving Oregon forward. I greatly appreciate the opportunity to be with you for your ongoing interest in the Oregon legislature and, more importantly, in Oregon's future. I appreciate the opportunity to be with you. Thank you very much. With that, I have the opportunity to introduce my friend and co-speaker of the Oregon House, Representative Arnie Roblan.
I do want to begin by really emphasizing the relationship that was born out of many conversations between myself and co-speaker Hanna. It has been an honor and a privilege to serve with him, and I think that the real relationship is one that's built on trust. You know, a trust that when we say we're going to do something, we will do that, a trust that we aren't going to change in the middle of the stream and be a different person than we were when we began. It is only through that consistency, even if we disagree, that you can build a long-term relationship which ends in a session like we just had. And it took some difficult times, but during that time, that relationship and that trust grew. And I call him a friend. I know we've had a lot of conversations about that, and one of the things that we said would be a test of whether the session went well is if at the end of it we could say we were as much friends as we were at the beginning. And the reality is it did turn out that way. I was looking at my calendar this morning and I realized that I had 2 City Club meetings to go to. First there was this one, and there was another one in Florence, Oregon. At Florence City Club, it was really spawned because of the city clubs here, and some members who retired down to the Florence area and decided they needed to have an opportunity to meet with like-minded people and have conversations about important things. And I've had the opportunity to speak to them many times. And though I look around and I see the people here, I recognize it really is the same, serving the same function. And our communities, although very far apart, geographically, have a lot of things in common. And I think people oftentimes forget that. I remember it because as a high school principal, it was always clear to me that we did a lot of work and produced a lot of students out of Marshfield High School, and they don't live in Coos Bay any longer. They live in Portland, and they live in Eugene, and they live all over. And one of them serves as a representative with me. Brian Clem, who is in Salem, was one of my students. His mother was one of the teachers at our school. But all throughout the state, there are students that come from Coos Bay, and they come back to bring their experiences when they come home to Coos Bay to visit their folks and to visit the high school, and share with us the things that are going on. And in my experience, my kids, all 3 of them, have chosen to live their lives in New York, Washington, D.C., and San Francisco. And so we have great places to visit, but they aren't back in our hometowns. And, you know, I got into the legislature, and I know Bruce did, because our areas need economic development. We need places to bring our kids back to. And so one of the proud things that I am is that we did work together. We showed people that it could be done, you know. And when people woke up on that day in November in 2010 elections and saw that the House was divided 30-30, it was a big shock. I remember staying up late that night and watching, and I kept thinking, this is really weird. Could it really be that it's getting 30-30? And I went and started going through all the names and all the people, and I said, this is amazing. It's going to be 30-30. And as Bruce was saying, we had no idea what that meant and how it was going to look. And most people thought we would be paralyzed. They thought that we would be so divided that nothing would get accomplished. But one by one, issue by issue, task by task, the Oregon legislature delivered for Oregon. That is probably the proudest thing that I can say. And it wasn't any one person or 2 people. It was a collective group of actually 91 people, because I put the governor in there as part of the reason that it all worked. And then there's all of our staff and all of the other people in the Capitol that supported us trying to make it work. So when we began by assigning our negotiating teams to come together at the beginning of the session to figure out how we were going to govern, it was kind of an interesting experience. We both came together, and one of the things we found real quickly was that we were going to have co-governance. It was almost instantaneous in the first negotiations between the Republicans and the Democrats. And we didn't exactly know what that meant, but it kind of meant we were going to have co-speakers and co-chairs and co-everythings. And so then we started figuring out how to deal from there. Our first obligation was to figure out what the rules were going to be that we used for that. And people said, this is going to go pretty easily. And then we found out that, you know, there are real philosophical differences between the 2 groups of people that walked into that room. And we'd walk together, we were talking about that earlier this morning, we'd walk down the halls with our 2 negotiating teams, and we'd get to the room and we'd decide, really there's nothing to talk about, and we'd go back, and we wouldn't even talk that day. And it was when our caucuses decided who they had chosen to be the 2 leaders to 2 speaker candidates, that Bruce and I basically said when we weren't negotiating with the regular team, we needed to sit down and talk. We needed to figure out what it was that was really important. And I will tell you that the greatest skill that anyone has is the ability to listen, and to listen with intent, so that you try to figure out what is it that really drives the person who's sitting across from you, because until you know that, it's really difficult to come to any kind of conclusion as to how we're going to move forward. And to Bruce's credit, and I hope to mine, we were exceedingly honest in those one-on-one meetings. We agreed to really put it on the line and take the risk that it takes to express why certain things created the reaction they did with each of our groups. So issue by issue, day by day, we started getting the rules and we figured out how we were going to go. I think the thing that people don't understand, I had read all the research, and it had said there's a lot of different ways that legislators have divided when they are evenly split. But there was only one characteristic that seemed to indicate whether or not they were going to be successful. And that one characteristic was the 2 people chosen to be the leaders of their respective parties had to get along. They had to make it work. The other stuff didn't seem to make much difference. That one did. And I think both of us came there with the conviction that we were going to make it work. We started the structure and we got the rules finally, and that was the other thing that was funny. We were told that we all started thinking as the negotiations were going, there's not that much to do. We're here in November. We got all the way till January. We'll get this done pretty quickly. We finished the last of the rules on January 9th, getting ready to go into the next day, January 10th, and get sworn in. And at that particular day and that morning, when Bruce and I saw each other in the halls, we were getting ready, and all of our family was there, one of the concerns had always been, are we really going to get elected? And we looked at each other and realized, and I said, Bruce, I got my 30 and you, so I got 31, and hopefully you've got your 30 and me, you got your 31, we're okay, let's go forth and have a great day. As it turned out, it was unanimous, and I think that set a tone because it was a confirmation from all of our members that we had made a decision that we were going to work this out together. However difficult it was, we would do that. You know, we managed to assign bills, which a lot of people didn't think we would get done, to committees. We balanced the 09-11 budget when most people thought we wouldn't be able to do that. And that was probably the first big test. You know, most of the people in our caucus did not believe that we could figure out how to balance the 09-11 budget in a timely manner, that there were too many hurdles, we had too many conversations in the past, and they were this conservative about this, and we needed this, and how are we going to balance that budget? And we had made a commitment that by the end of February we would do that. When that happened, when we actually, and just so you know, we had made a commitment in our rules that when it came to budget bills, there would always be 16 Democrats and 16 Republicans. And that's a hard, hard thing to do. And when that budget came out to balance the 09-11 budget, and it passed, and people lived up to their word about providing the votes that they said they'd vote, I think there was a collective sigh that maybe this would work. Maybe we could work together when other places in the country were not. Maybe we could. So we balanced the budget, and then we passed, for the first time, our redistricting plan in decades. Actually, if you look back, we were trying to figure out when, in fact, have they done both the legislative and the congressional districts. And we believe that the last time the vote was bipartisan, the actual stuff got done in the legislature was 1911, 100 years ago. And I credit that because when there are extraordinary times, extraordinary people step up. And the 4 people, and they were mentioned before, and I can only take the opportunity to mention them again, you can't mention it enough. And I know Chris Garrett is here, and I appreciate that a lot. But Chris Garrett and Sean Lindsay from the House, and Suzanne Bonamici and Chris Telfer, you know, it was interesting when we had our meetings with the leadership with them, how from the beginning, when they were starting to build their trust, which did not exist at the beginning, as we would expect, but as they set boundaries for each other about let's not talk about this, we'll share this, but don't talk, and we have to have trust with each other. As it continued to work, they continued to get that same kind of trust that Bruce and I were forming, at least within this particular area. And at the end of the day, they came up with a legislative solution for redistricting. And we had already had a little lawsuit filed on the congressionals because we weren't getting any closer, and we figured that was over with, and we'd kind of all decided that that wasn't going to happen. And we get together in this group, and the three of us, the Senate President and Bruce and I, had all committed that we really, really wanted to get it done. And our team had taken that seriously, and they'd gotten the first part done. And so we looked at it and we said, hey guys, there's still a few weeks left. Don't you think you could get the congressionals done? And you could just see them kind of, okay, maybe we can do this, in that room. And they walked back into those rooms, and they did the really hard work that it takes, you know, the line by line. If you haven't seen what you go through to do redistricting, it is something that you really don't want to watch and see. You know, line by line, house by house, how are we going to get these things done? It's a pretty remarkable process. And they went back into that room and they got it done. And in the last week or so, we were able to pass that. We expect all of it's going to move forward. We've been looking and we watch to see if there's any litigation about it. But the reality is, those people did a job that Oregonians should look at as a model for the future. And I hope that, from my perspective, we continue to do it, and we continue to make it the priority that we made it, and leave it and do with it as we have been doing in the past. And I wanted to say thanks to Chris, since he's here, and all four of us. And I'll tell you, it was not easy getting him to do this. This is a thankless little task, but he stepped up. I really didn't have to twist too long. Chris is one of those people who rises above things and decides what's best to do what's best. And the big thing, we balanced the budget. You know, we went in thinking that we might be as short as $3.5 billion. That's a daunting number. And it is daunting, and at the end of the day, we balanced a budget that did as much as it could possibly do for those vulnerable Oregonians and Oregon in general. I've just been so amazed at that. I'm going to say one thing here that, again, Representative Hanna and I, when we were talking with other people at the beginning, we decided that we wanted to make a new committee, and it was a joint tax credit committee. Last session, we passed a bill that required the sunsetting of tax credits in a 6-year cycle. So our first group sunset this particular time, and if we didn't do something, there was this group of tax credits that were going to go away. And it actually would have cost us, that group, about $33 million this year in tax credits. And we put this committee together, and we had all of our committees look at every tax credit, and including all the ones that were sunsetted, to say, are they doing what they're supposed to be doing? Are they the efficient government expectations? Are they meeting the requirements that we set for them, producing jobs or in green environmental issues? Are they doing what they need? And people looked at it very seriously, and then at the end of the day, we really didn't have a lot of money. We came to them, we brought that group in. That was a fun day too. And we said, you know, we've decided we're going to give you $10 million for your tax credit committee. And they'd been spending a whole session trying to figure out how to put tax credits together, and they went back with the ingenuity that only comes from people in desperation, and they redid tax credits for the future and came up with a package which I think is remarkable for that $10 million. And again, people rose to the occasion. They took the time to look and make really good decisions, and I hope that as time goes on, that this committee becomes a regular part of our Ways and Means process, and that we really look not only at these tax credits, but all tax expenditures over time to see if they're doing what we really expect them to do. It was a challenge, but we delivered. So if there was one word that I would use to describe this legislative session, that word would be better. You know, we did better, maybe even far better than most people expected. Our economy is better. We have one of the fastest growing job rates in the country. And we've added well over 10,000 private sector jobs in the past 6 months. Revenues have begun to inch up. Corporate profits remain high. Corporate taxes remain among the lowest in the nation. Oregon's economy is coming back, slowly and steadily. And I attribute part of that recovery to some of the legislation we passed in 2009. The Jobs and Transportation Act is putting construction workers back to work across Oregon. Healthy Kids legislation has covered 85,000 previously uninsured children and is creating jobs in the healthcare sector. Earlier this week, I had the opportunity to go back to my high school for the culmination of a 25-year quest of mine to get a real health center at my high school. And we have partnered with a federally recognized health center called Waterfall Clinic. They received a grant, and the school district provided the property, and we did a groundbreaking for a new high school clinic, which will serve all of the kids and the community in Coos Bay for years to come. It is one of the things that is really heartening to me because kids don't learn well when they aren't well, and we need to have opportunities for them. And when you can walk across the street in the school and have your health care needs taken care of. I talked to the nurses, one of whom was one of my high school nurses that helped me begin this whole process. And she was saying that they've had a great opportunity in using Healthy Kids to insure kids in our community and make sure that they were taken care of. It also brought $1.2 million to the Coos Bay community to build this new building, which is construction jobs for local people in our community. Capital construction projects approved in 2009 are underway and putting even more workers back to work. Much of the good work we did in 2009 is coming to fruition today. The session was really one in which we needed to protect those gains, hold on to the progress that we had made in 2007, 2009, and then to compare Oregon to most other states. I think you will see that we did that. We did a great job of that. And we did a great job because we worked with our fellow Republicans and with the help of Bruce, put aside all of those differences to make sure we did what was right for Oregon. We balanced that budget. And so when we had to make deep cuts in some very important programs, we did manage to protect some of our most vulnerable citizens. Education funding is better today than it was at the beginning of the session. We increased by over $150 million from the governor's recommended budget to education. That original governor's recommended budget was $5.56 billion for K-12. We got that number up to $5.74 billion. It's still not it is still inadequate. Too many schools will close early. We'll have to lay off teachers, or we'll cut programs. We do need to figure out a way to adequately fund our education system. Having spent 32 years in the system and having been through cycles over and over again, our kids deserve better. And I appreciated the fact that we worked hard to get that budget early and that we've helped our schools make decisions as best they can. But the future of Oregon depends on us figuring out how in the state of Oregon we both fund and use the new legislation that was passed to make Oregon schools better. It is a combination. We need to be efficient, but we also need to make sure that the funding is there. But again, it is better, and there's the word again. Then we're much better than when we started the session. We also passed some excellent reforms in the area of education and healthcare. Let's start with healthcare. 2009, we passed Healthy Kids. We covered 85,000 uninsured children. The only state in the union that moved forward on healthcare, even in the midst of a global recession. It was a necessary step for the future. It has made things better for our kids. In 2011, we knew we had to take the next steps forward. Senate Bill 99, the healthcare exchange, is one of those steps forward. Under the exchange, individuals and small businesses will have a place to go to compare rates, plans, and best possible way to deal with families and their businesses. This is particularly helpful for small businesses who can tailor their plans to meet the needs of their budgets. Oregon is well ahead of the national curve in this area. 3650, the Healthcare Transformation Act, is another step forward. And again, we need to find $150 million in savings, and we have a lot of work to do before our next session gets here. We did a number of things to help businesses. Cool Schools, House Bill 2960, repairing and retrofitting aging schools and helping create jobs, enhancing student learning, and reducing operational costs. Building healthy learning environments. We also passed Oregon Inc. We provided $16 million to Oregon Inc. It helps create jobs, creates companies, and brings outside dollars back to Oregon. Oregon Inc. has a track record of generating $7 for every dollar invested. We do have some things that we need to continue to work on. Let me go back to a couple others. Connect Oregon 4. Again, we continue to build roads, multimedia modal transportations all over Oregon. That was probably the most important bills in the past for my area. We bought a railroad with our Port of Coos Bay, and we continue to improve our economy because of the port. These are on the job fronts are better, and they are the beginning, not the end of what we need to do to continue to make more jobs. But there are some things that were left undone. We did not reform the kicker and establish a constitutionally protected rainy day funds that we need to have. We did not ban BPA. We did not pass legislation that protected homeowners from foreclosure and dealings with that we should have. We did not pass tuition equity, and we should have. We did not pass Economic Development Finance Authority to provide loans for small business and job creation that we should have. We did not pass legislation preventing tax refund loan scams, and we should have. We did not approve the funding of the PSU Sustainability Center, and we will when we get all the answers we need. I think it's a great project. So there's much that was left undone this session, much that lies ahead to do in February. But overall, when you look at our accomplishments this session, from redistricting and balancing the budgets, from education to funding the healthcare exchange, from Connect Oregon 4 to expanding the bottle bill, from increasing slots for early childhood programs to reducing or eliminating tax credits that simply were not working, from passing Cool Schools legislation and protecting much of what we offer to our seniors to help them stay in their homes. Overall, things are better in Oregon than they were, and than they were at the beginning of the session, and that's a good thing for Oregon. Thank you very much.
Before I introduce our Friday Forum host, if you have written a question on an index card, now is the time to raise it so that staff can come along and collect it from you. The first question for our speakers, as always, will be from our Friday Forum host, City Club Governor Barnes Ellis. Barnes serves as General Counsel for Mercy Corps and is a partner at Stoll Reeves. Barnes previously served as a member of the City Club Board of Governors in the 1970s and has served on 2 City Club study committees relating to city governance. Barnes?
Well, first of all, listening to the two of you and watching the session unfold, I think makes a lot of us feel really good that we're not California, Minnesota, or Wisconsin. Now, Bruce spoke at some length about PERS reform, and Arnie, I noted that in your list of things that were not done, you did not mention PERS reform. A lot of observers believe that because the public employee unions, SIU and AFSCME, in recent history have taken a very aggressive approach to either supporting or punishing legislators who take a position on PERS reform, that is why nothing happened in this session and why it may be very difficult for anything happen into future sessions. So I have 3 related questions, and Arnie, I'm going to ask them to you because you haven't addressed this topic yet. Are those observers right? Without PERS reform, can we ever achieve a sustainable budget? And do you support Bruce's proposals?
I do not believe they are correct. I do believe that there are a lot of people, including myself, who believe that we made a lot of PERS reforms and they are coming to fruition back in 2001, 2003, and that when our economy is doing well, we have the best funded retirement system in the country, and that the reality is we're currently over 80% funded, which is still better than most retirement funds in the nation, and that we have done some things that make it better. We did one little PERS tweak at the end of the session that said that members who retire after January 1st, 2012, who leave the state, cannot expect to receive the added money that they get in the state. We had a lawsuit that took place a number of years ago that resulted in the fact that we had to make up a payment for people who stay in the state because we weren't going to pay income tax on those PERS benefits. They now do, so there's a supplement that's given. That is no longer available to people who move out of the state, which I think is the right thing to do. So from my perspective, I don't think that PERS is broken. I think that what's broken is we need to figure out how to make our economy come back. When we have a strong economy, when the stock market is working, the investments in PERS have been appropriate. So I don't think that was the reason that they didn't happen. I think we found out last time when we made PERS reforms that many of them, when the Supreme Court ruled on them, were found to be unconstitutional. And so you have to be very careful if you're going to change retirement systems that you do it in ways that don't cost you more money than they will save you. So I think that's the big reasons why we didn't work on PERS reforms.
You want me to take a shot at it?
Go for
while
it.
we're at it? Look, I think until we get additional PERS reforms, we haven't addressed sustainability in terms of spending within the government system. It's not just state. Understand that state employees, city, county, school districts, OUS, everyone involved in the PERS system has a problem. And we can talk about, are we better than someplace else by the amount we have funded of that? But we need to really focus on the unfunded liability left in the PERS system. And when you look forward into any of the budgets of the entities that I just mentioned, you look at their unfunded liability in PERS, and you see cost drivers predicted for the state to exceed 16% in the next biennium. So for every other organization out there, you have these enormous cost drivers just to keep up with your PERS contribution. Now, the other piece for me, being a private employer, I'm glad to say this in front of you and in front of all my employees, my plan's 100% funded. We put the money in every month, okay? So when my employees retire, the money's there. And I know that's a little different, but I make that point because in the private sector, the money's there, and we don't make a promise we can't keep. We hope. And that's the other piece of the state side, and I'm not picking on anybody, but simply said, when the market's great, it's easy to promise an 8% return. When the market's not great, promise an 8%, it's a pretty big number. I think we've got to address this. I think it takes a lot of courage, and to say that any one legislator is controlled or not by a different entity, you got to leave that out. It's not the entity, it's the reality of the problem, and we've got to face it head on.
Thank you. We'll now take questions from the floor. As always, members are invited to the microphone to ask their question, and asking questions at the microphone is a privilege of City Club membership. Before you ask your question, please be sure to identify yourself as a City Club member and ask your question in under 30 seconds or less, or you're likely to see this question mark reminding you to wrap things up. First question.
Mary McWilliams, City Club member. This is on climate change, and I also want to thank you both for your comments and your hard work this year. Today in the Oregonian, in the environmental section, there was a great column by Carrie on climate change, talking about what's going on in Portland, Metro, the state. What is the mood in the state legislature on climate change? And I know you have done some preliminary things there.
I guess I would tell you that from a priority perspective, climate change wasn't at the top of the list of issues to be dealt with. As we've mentioned, facing a $3.5 billion budget shortfall took a whole lot of priority in terms of what we were focusing on. If you talk about climate change over a shorter time period, I can tell you as a Coca-Cola bottler, I'm still hoping for the sun to come out and get a little warming of the state for the summer, and I hope you don't take that offensively. Look, I don't think it was a priority in this legislative cycle. I think, simply put, we were out there trying to make sure that Oregonians were getting the services they deserved and at the same time being responsible to our state.
I think that I agree that it was not a high priority, but it was a priority. If you look at the kinds of things we did in our tax credit committees and others, we were trying hard to continue the gains we've already made in how do we find new alternative sources of power, how do we get off our dependency on oil and so on. The work we've done with Oregon Inc. with respect to wave energy, the ocean reserve issue and respect to getting money for the ongoing research to find our baseline data so we can actually look and see what goes on in the future. All of those things will help us in understanding any impacts that we're going to have on with respect to global warming. So I think it's always a part of the things we're doing now. It was not the highest priority. It was trying to get a balanced budget and move on.
From the tables here, from the index cards, both speakers complimented legislative success for the redistricting effort, but only Representative Hanna suggested a change toward the independent commission model. So a question for Representative Roblan is, would you support a change in who draws the district lines, say by 2021 and beyond?
I mean, I would have to look at any other plan. My feeling has been, and this goes back, I guess, maybe to being a principal and reading our Constitution and understanding how we got where we are. I think part of the process is one that has been given to the legislature by our Constitution, and they need to take it seriously, work at it appropriately. We have some real safeguards in our state that other states don't that say, one, it cannot be done politically. That's kind of interesting. It's one of the most political things that we do. But we also have guidelines about what you have to consider in making the decisions to do the lines. I think it holds people foot to the fire to do that appropriately and be able to articulate why lines were drawn in particular places that meet the requirements of the law. I think that what we are doing can and should work.
Okay, thank you. Another question from the microphone.
My name is Angela Wyckoff, and I'm a City Club member. And I would like to follow up on the PERS issue. As Representative Hanna said, well, first of all, I'd like to congratulate you both on your collegial environment and balancing the 2009-2011 budget. But I would like to follow up on the PERS issue. I think, as Representative Hanna said, there is a very large unfunded actuarial liability. And the increasing overheads, payroll overheads for PERS is taking away from the delivery of services. The City Club earlier this year completed a study that showed some ways for substantial cost savings. The Governor's Reset report also indicated places for cost savings. And so I'm wondering, what is the likelihood that this issue will be addressed in 2012?
I'll start. I think 2012 with 35 days is very difficult unless we are starting now. I will look at your City Club proposals, and I know we've looked at some of the other proposals. The question is finding things that really can be implemented that work and don't end us up in court and cost us more money and then are reversed afterwards. These are very complex issues that take much time to investigate, and we need to have an interim committee working on it if they're going to. We don't have one at this time, so I would find it doubtful that 2012 is where we'll work on that issue.
As I mentioned in my remarks, I'm going to be back with legislation talking about the pickup. Again, just the 6% pickup piece costs Oregon $334 million per biennium. A 5% contribution is an enormous difference. I think we have to talk about the PERS pickup piece and the healthcare contribution. Both of them are hundreds of millions of dollars in savings that could further fund programs that Oregon desperately needs and put us in a place that makes us much more comparative to the private sector on those two benefit issues.
I think we have time for one more question from the floor.
I agree that we need to get serious about school funding, but I don't see a lot of capacity in either the property tax or the income tax. So why don't we consider a sales tax dedicated to education? Even as a native Oregonian, I'm open-minded, open to a sales tax. It would take a public education program, but I don't see too many alternatives.
Let me take a shot at that one first. I'm not in favor of a sales tax for education, but I am in favor of a harvest. And to simply say this, Oregon has rural schools and rural roads and rural public safety primarily because of a sustainable yield harvest that's available to us. We have one of the largest harvestable crops in the world in our state, and we are underutilizing that by far. You want Oregon schools to have a whole lot better opportunity for funding. Let's get to a sustained yield harvest in our state, and let's put people back to work in our rural communities, and we can have an education system like no other.
A place where we really agree, being from rural areas, 51% of our state is owned by the federal government, and we have the best fiber in the world in Douglas fir trees. We are wasting an asset, in my opinion, that could be helping fund schools and do other things and be done sustainably, environmentally sound, and make for environments that are better for all of us to live, play, and work in. So we need to figure out how to have a forest policy at the federal level that'll help us, and then show them the example that we can set by how we deal with our own Oregon forests.
Unfortunately, we've run out of time for further questions, but as you all saw, there were many more questions for our speakers, and that's not a surprise given today's topic. I think that there are probably guests and members here in the audience that would love to stay and ask additional questions. I know that you all are on tight schedules, but if you have a few moments after the program, I would invite you to stay with us if you're able. Please join us next week to learn about the Tunisian transition from dictatorship to democracy. And as we close, please join me in expressing our deep appreciation to today's guests, both for their commitment to collegial public service and for joining us here today, Representatives and co-speakers Bruce Hanna and Arnie Roblan. And we are adjourned.